Hey folks, this is Boren. I'm a former felony prosecutor, but most of my career I've been a criminal defense attorney. I'm here today to talk to you about what is reasonable suspicion. I recently had a client who would have gone to prison for a very long time just because he had a cartoon in his front seat on a cover of a magazine that looked something like this. Of course, this is Donald Duck depicted smoking marijuana, but I'll come back to Donald later. The question is, based on reasonable suspicion, can a law enforcement officer stop you or engage you, which could lead to a detention and to a search and arrest and possible prosecution in court? Well, let me start with reasonable suspicion as to what it is and what it is not according to the courts. Very important to know that it's really not just a hunch, some subjective feeling the officer may have. It must be based on articulable facts. Now, what that means is it must be able to be spoken in some objective way and not just based on a feeling. They have to believe that there's some kind of criminal activity possibly afoot. So this means officer would have to use his senses, whether it's smell, sight, touch, or hearing, whatever it may be. Unfortunately, there's really no specific standard for what is reasonable. In general, what reasonableness is would an average person in the position of the officer have done and felt and believed reasonably that this event was in fact a possible criminal episode? Now, it is from the officer's point of view, and the court will consider that the fact that the officer has some specific training, perhaps experience, of course, specialized in this kind of thing, and that will be considered. So it's not just a man on the street. It would be from another officer reasonably situated in the same position. Additionally, courts really take in what's called the totality of circumstances. That means kind of all things considered. So everything will be considered in determining reasonableness. Now, back to Donald for a second. The officer initially stopped my client because he believed he was following too closely in a traffic situation. Now, this stop, I believe, would be deemed as reasonable and would be based on a reasonable suspicion that the officer had that my client was violating a traffic ordinance or law. Well, that's as far as it would have gone if he just had cited him, given him a ticket for that, and then let him go. But yet, of course, I wouldn't have met my client had the officer not gone further and believed he could search the vehicle based on Donald. Well, the search resulted in finding amount of marijuana and, more importantly, THC, and is an amount that would have and could have landed my client in prison for up to 20 years. Well, the good news is I was able to talk to the DA, and she saw it as I did and did not file the case based on the fact that the officer had a lack of reasonable suspicion and probable cause to conduct the search, which was very important for my client because even a charge would have ended his teaching career. So this couldn't even be on his record, because if it was on his record, his life really would have been upended. Of course, this Donald Duck situation is based on a traffic offense, but this applies generally to all interaction with law enforcement. As always, if you have any questions about reasonable suspicion and related topics, as always, reach out to me and I'll be happy to talk with you. And always remember, if you're interacting with a police officer, turn on your audio or better yet, your video on your smartphone.